Welcome to Teaching in Color, the podcast where we empower teachers, redefine education, and amplify voices. Here, we dive into real stories, bold conversations, and the challenges and triumphs of educators making a difference. Whether you're in the classroom, the community, or just here for inspiration, this is your space. Let's talk, let's grow, and let's make change together. This is Teaching in Color. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Teaching in Color, the podcast where we explore the diverse experiences of educators who are shaping the next generation. Today we have a special guest, Megan Reed, a passionate ninth grade English teacher from Minnesota. Megan brings a global perspective to the classroom, shaped by her international schooling, her experience navigating predominantly white educational spaces, and her commitment to fostering student engagement and representation. Megan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited for this episode today. I think especially with this season, you're the first episode of the season, by the way. So I'm super excited for season 2, and especially to get this ball rolling on such a unique perspective that you bring to education. And I think today the conversation is really going to shape a lot of minds, impact a lot of people. So I'm super excited just to have you here today.
Thanks.
Of course. So here on the podcast, Megan, we start off the episode with a general question, which I think kind of leads and snowballs into like your experiences. So what has been your journey into teaching like? Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, okay. I did not want to teach, to be honest. I never thought as a kid I'd be a teacher. I
Yeah.
remember being in 7th grade in my English class, actually, and like looking at my teacher and thinking about how much work they put into the class. And I was like, I never want to be a teacher because of that. But then here I am like 10 years later, teaching English and teaching. But I grew up, I really enjoyed my education and my experience, like you said, like living overseas, going to international schools. And when I got into college, I was undeclared and I really didn't know what to do. I was looking into a lot of different fields. I knew I liked reading, and that was something that I was thinking about English. But unfortunately, I was like, I don't know, like I feel like our society doesn't very value the intelligence that like just like full scholars of like literature have. And so I was like, I want a job at the end of my degree. So I decided to go with teaching because I had done a lot of tutoring in the past. I really like seeing people being able to learn. So
that's so interesting. Like I've heard from every like teacher that I've known, like teachers on the podcast, teachers I've just interacted with. Like that's never been like our first thought of like entering a profession is like teaching. Like I remember like when I first started, I was like, as a kid, because I mean, my family, like, we're made up of educators. Like, I'm a product of education. So, like, my mom's a teacher, you know, like, my aunt's a teacher, my uncle's a professor. And so, like, I remember as a kid being like, I hate teaching. Like, I do not want to be a teacher. Because I remember going to, like, summer school with my aunt, like, helping her build her classroom. And it just was like, oh my gosh, like, this is the amount of work that you have to put in, like, at the beginning of the year and then take down at the end of the year. And just, it's a cycle and a repeat.
And you probably saw like all the emotions they brought home too from school and
like
all that,
grading at late hours, phone calls at late hours. It's just a lot. So I was like, I'm not doing it, but obviously here I am. So
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, you know, hearing your background and like your love for literature, you chose to be an English teacher. Your background is really, really unique. You grew up in an international school, attended a predominantly white college, and now teach in a diverse public school. How has that shaped your teaching philosophy?
Yeah. What's interesting about our international school, so my international experience, even though, you know, I did have classmates from all over the world, which is really cool to have that in the class, but it was predominantly Asian. And so I would say it wasn't all that diverse, but we did get to explore different stories that people had. And I think that that kind of diversified my own education, I will say. Even though we were reading very traditional texts, I was hearing stories from a lot of people's experiences. And I think that's part of learning too. Going to school in college, I might talk about this later. Like, I think one downside of it being like predominantly white,
Hmm.
was the fact that like I never realized that being a teacher of color was kind of
Hmm.
a thing. And it
Yeah.
also had its benefits and drawbacks too, or like hard things that come with it, you know? And so
Yeah.
that was something that I never really touched on in college, but I'm really thankful for where I ended up because I feel like my colleagues, they're just
Hmm.
so like we talk about really important issues. We're
Yes.
a part of like deciding what literature our students get to learn from and the experiences that they can connect to. And so, yeah, I think I'm really grateful for that like myriad of experiences. I feel like I've
Yeah.
had a foot in every single experience and then like been able to decide which parts I want to keep.
I absolutely love to hear that. And I want to highlight just like one thing that you said, which
Sure.
was, although you went to a school where a lot of you guys had an Asian background, you still were able to learn from each other and you all provided different experiences of life and stories. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes we kind of like forget that, sometimes in our own communities we may look the same, but we all have different stories to tell. So
Mhm.
I absolutely love you bringing that up. And so I do want to like, there's a parallel there to my own experiences. Cause I mean, I grew up in East Houston, Texas. There's like a large Black and Brown community. So growing up, I never had the opportunity to interact with people from different countries or different backgrounds, different
Mhm.
cultures. And so when
Mhm.
left high school and went to college, I was like, whoa, this is just amazing. Like hearing people's stories and the culture that they bring. Especially right now, even as a teacher, like I have a team of teachers that I work with, a Filipino woman, a Hispanic woman, and a variety of people that I get to talk to, and we talk about social issues, and it's so amazing to hear their perspectives. But at the end of the day, we all come together and like we love and support each other. So I love how you have that and that support.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And who would have thought that we had like those connections? You being in Texas,
Yes.
me being overseas too,
Right.
and like growing up and now like connecting. So
Yeah, it's like it's crazy. So you're in Minnesota, right?
I am in Minnesota.
Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. We'll talk more about that and that like
Mhm.
experience being in Minnesota. So that was just something that when I was reading your bio, I was like, she's in Minnesota. Like, yeah, yeah, we'll talk more about it. But I want to transition into kind of our next segment, and that's bringing a global perspective to American public education. I
Mhm.
know it's like a huge asset and a huge undertaking for yourself. What challenges and advantages come with that?
Yeah, I think it's so important, which is why I love that you're highlighting this. Like, thank you
Hmm.
so much.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
I think that having a global understanding or a little
Hmm.
bit more open worldview is
Yeah.
really important, but America doesn't do it all that much. And I
Hmm.
think that is because we are, we have a lot going on here too, which is totally
Yeah.
understandable. And like, there's a lot of stories to be highlighted here. I feel like the
Hmm.
world almost is in like America needs to know about the world, but also the world has come to America too. So like we have
Yes.
those stories here. But I think a benefit of understanding like global perspective is
Hmm.
like awareness that will lead to like less um like not ostracizing people, but like
Yes.
like if there's more familiarity about something,
Hmm.
then people are less likely to stereotype or less likely to make judgments very quickly. And so
Yes.
that's something I've been able to see my students do as like we're maybe sharing different narratives or
Hmm.
choosing books that might highlight different stories. For example, like we had last year a story about, I think it was a, actually, I don't know if it was my class, but it
Yeah.
was Pakistani literature.
Uh-huh.
And it was about just a very normal life and a very normal story about a kid that lived in Pakistan. And I think it
Yeah.
was very important for students to be able to understand that, like, not
Yes.
every single narrative needs to be like war torn literature or
Yes.
like about a traumatic
Hmm.
instance or, maybe some of the stereotypes that we might have for different groups.
Yes. You are
Yeah.
completely correct. I will say, you speak about like that book itself. And so I think when it comes to what you're saying, like familiarity,
Yeah.
is like there's a lot of fear associated with it. What you don't know, you're fearful of.
Mhm.
And I remember growing up and watching like the news or like CNN or oh my gosh, like I can't remember. I think it's like ABC or like the 60 seconds, whatever. And I would see stories of like Black and brown individuals and especially Black men or Black boys.
Mhm.
And it would be a story of traumatic experience and like coming from like a hardship, and then like now you're like, whoa, like this is something amazing has happened, but I've had to go undergo through traumatic experience to get there. And so I
Right.
remember as a kid being like, why is it always such a sad story pieced with it? Why
Yeah.
is there always such like despair and all these things associated with it when there's a lot of Black people that I know, brown people that I know, people of color that I know that have had great experiences growing up, great
Right.
experiences through college, great experiences in their adulthood, and able to tell stories that still have the same impact.
Hmm.
So to me, that's just always something that I thought about, especially as a kid, because it's so disheartening that we always have to pair such a traumatic experience with a story of success.
Yeah. That's really well said.
So we're moving into, I know we kind of like shifted into segment two, but this one is really getting deeper into segment two. As
Okay.
an Asian American educator teaching in a predominantly white space, how do you navigate conversations about race and identity with your students?
Yeah, honestly, I will say I feel like it's such a privilege to be
Hmm.
an Asian American educator. And I say that knowing that, like, yes, I feel like I do take on some more burdens of like
Hmm.
being able to navigate student experiences and what they share with me.
Yeah.
But I also am really grateful for the students that come back. I notice are predominantly students of color to come and talk
Yes.
to me to share their like instances. And I don't know whether or not that correlation is because that they see represent like me representing
Hmm.
um, a different voice or like honestly just like being an educator of color,
Yeah.
or if it's like our interpersonal connection, which I also really emphasize in class.
Yes.
But I value that a lot. And I think that being able to share about my own experiences when it's appropriate or highlighting different, yeah, again, different stories in
Yeah.
class. We talk about, we have a like a book that we look through, Claudette
Hmm.
Colvin, if you've heard
Yeah.
of it.
Yes.
And so it kind of deals a little bit with like civil rights, the
Hmm.
movement, and all that. And we talk about the different stories from that period. And so I think students are able to open up more and share during that time. Vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So like they're able
Yes.
to share more with me and I hear more from their stories as I share mine.
Yeah, and I can just assume like you have a strong like community in your classroom that I hear right now is like a strong sense of community, like they feel safe, they feel open and
Yeah.
able to like talk to you, but not just you, but like with their peers as well. And so again, that like it gives them the opportunity for that storytelling. I
Yeah.
do have a question for you, and it kind of like it's a transition question that it kind of goes outside of the script just for a little bit, but I want to ask you, being an Asian American woman in your schools, have you
Mhm.
had because I hear a lot of like, you mentioned kind of like having that on your shoulders, like carrying, being that person and being that voice. Has maybe your school or your community kind of placed you not in a box, but event situations where maybe like they're wanting that from you to kind of spearhead some things, and I can kind of like help with an example of that I've experienced where at my own school or school that I've worked at in the past, I have been the only male on my campus, and especially being the only male, being one of the only Black man on my campus. And so
Mhm.
I've had experiences where they'll say, hey, this month is February, can
Mm.
you spearhead our Black History Month event? And I want you to put it together event. And I know you can do it. And again, it's like, yes, I love a leadership role. I love, having that and bringing culture into my schools. But I also want them to understand at the same time that just because it's Black History Month does not mean that I should have to take under that. So I just want to, like, if you're open to it, like, is that something that you've had to kind of like address or situation that you've had in the past before?
Yeah, but thank you for sharing too.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a big responsibility to be given.
Hmm.
And yeah, it does come with like you feel like grateful, but also
Yeah.
like, why me? Um, I will say at my school, we have a
Hmm.
large Hmong population. And
Yes.
so there are already Hmong leaders that are like
Hmm.
ethnic Hmong. I'm ethnically Chinese. And so I don't necessarily get like spearheaded or chosen for that. I
Hmm.
think also because I'm a young teacher, they're
Yeah.
not necessarily, this is a good thing. They're protecting us. Like they're not
Yeah.
going after us and using up all of our energies after school.
Yes.
Um, and so I wouldn't say so much at our school that has not happened. And then, like I said, at college, I feel like it would have been an opportunity for us to talk about what it's like being an educator of color.
Hmm.
since that was never addressed, it really
Yes.
wasn't an issue. But I honestly would have taken that. I put myself into a group that was just reading diverse literature and
Yeah.
studying that, but I was never selected for those things. So
Got it. Okay.
yeah,
I just something that I was curious about because I've had this conversation,
it's a great.
um, with other educators, and it is something that, again, even our education preparation programs have not prepared us for. Is
Mhm.
I never thought about being a teacher of color until I stepped into my classroom because it just was never brought up and it was never something that we kind of delved into as a program. Like my program was called Urban Education. And
Okay.
so something like that is called urban education. You would think like, hey, we're going to have those conversations, and it, it never happened. So
Yeah.
it's just something like a little thought piece that I've always kind of like carried with me.
Yeah.
But into our next question, representation in the classroom is really important.
Mhm.
And we know that, this is what we're here for in this, especially with this podcast. What does this mean to you and how do you incorporate it into your teaching?
Representation in the classroom.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's really important.
Hmm.
I know that like me being an educator of color,
Yeah.
stepping into the classroom, I will honestly, I don't know, I maybe reflect a few little bits of some people's story, and
Hmm.
so they connect with me in that area. But obviously, like our teachers are not responsible for like
Yeah.
representing everything. So I think that's done best in literature,
Hmm.
and what we read. So that's probably what you're getting at. But like, I think our literature is pretty diverse. The ninth
Hmm.
grade team done a good job at like um, different representing different socioeconomic backgrounds and
Hmm.
different like um, I guess like racial and identity makeups as well
Yeah.
within our we read a bunch of short stories, so we'll read stories like Marigolds, if you've heard of it, or
Hmm.
the Scholarship Jacket, and that focuses on like Hispanic or like Black identities. And then we read about there's this one called How I Learned to Cook, and
Hmm.
that's on like a different gender identity. And then we have civil rights kind of a focus with Claudette
Yeah.
Colvin, and so we're able to talk about
Hmm.
social justice movements and how that's impacted us. So I think through that, but then ultimately, like all those stories, they're questioning just different questions of like that all humans can relate to. So it's not
Yeah.
just a focus on like whether or not be like race or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's good for students to be able to see bits of themselves. And then also some of our narratives, they're like young adults. And so
Hmm.
students choose books and read books that can like reflect their age group too.
Yeah. A lot of like culture being represented in storytelling and books. I love that.
Yeah.
This next question transition, I kind of like asked it already. Um, have you faced any challenges as a teacher of color in your school or community? I know we kind of briefly talked about it, but has there been anything that you've kind of had to handle in a sense?
I've had people at my current school, like they have my back and they're
Hmm.
looking out for me. And that's really beneficial for
Yeah.
me, I think, just as a young educator, as an Asian educator. I've had conversations with, I have my mentor last year because we
Hmm.
came in and first year educators had a mentor. He was a Hmong, and he, like, I would talk with him about like if it was navigating a student conversation where I felt like respect wasn't given. And it might have had to do with like me being a woman, me being
Yeah.
short and Asian and all that. And that was really helpful. So I would say
Hmm.
we have had positive experiences here, but yeah, so I only come with like good things to say, which is
Yeah.
I know that's not
Which is
everybody.
great.
Yeah.
No, yes, it's great. And again, like every story is told differently, but I love that you're here telling that story of what a campus or what education can look like.
Yeah.
And that
I
can
will
be a
say
positive. Yes.
right. I will say growing up, like I
Uh-huh.
never imagined having an Asian teacher as an English teacher. That just wasn't
Yeah.
associated. So I like breaking that stereotype when like
Hmm.
I'm introducing myself and they're like, "What do you teach?" And they're expecting something so different, and I'm able to
Yeah.
say English. And I think that it's like the infusion of different educators of color into all these areas for students
Yeah.
to be able to see themselves, but also for like everybody to normalize that as well.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a great think piece as well. Like we kind of over the years, we've seen educators be placed in boxes due to stigma. And
Mhm.
so I love how you bring that up. And that perfectly transitions to segment three, which is English education and then classroom engagement.
Oh, I love
English,
it. I'm so
yes.
excited.
This is like my favorite part of like every episode where I really get to talk about like the nitty gritty, the meat of like what you do in your classroom.
Yep.
Um, so English class is all about like discussion and engagement. How do you make sure every student feels seen and heard in your classroom?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, to begin, like with our classes, we
Hmm.
emphasize reading a lot,
Yes.
obviously. And so we take a whole ton of trips to the library. We have time cut out almost every single day for independent
Hmm.
reading. And I would say, like, how does that relate? But the reason why it relates is because,
Yeah.
like, I want students to be able to pick books that, like, they feel like they are,
Yeah.
interested in and all that stuff. And so I'm like one-on-one conferencing with students
Hmm.
sometimes, talking about their books, and that's like a piece that we can relate on. I think from the beginning of class, like it takes
Hmm.
me, honestly, this is embarrassing to say, but it takes me 2 weeks to learn everybody's name. And so I make them have name tags for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they just know it. They just know Miss Reed like takes a minute because she's a little slow in names. But after that, it's like the constant use of their names because names are so
Hmm.
powerful. Like we have so much attachment to them. It's getting to know like what do they do outside of school, and like in the moments that I'm not teaching, I'm just trying
Hmm.
to listen to them and like hear their stories, hear for connecting pieces that we can connect on, and then like build on that
Yeah.
so that when the time comes for like maybe they write an awesome personal narrative for me,
Hmm.
that I'm able to like highlight them if they're, willing for me to highlight them, or I'm able to like have a side conversation and tell them like you should really speak up more because your voice is really important. And we have
Yes.
like Socratic seminars, which are like small group discussion, but I know that's not everybody's favorite. It's kind of like a traumatic word for some people, but just a lot of different means of connecting that maybe other educators do for sure, but we do that in our class so that everybody gets to be heard.
Wow, I love, and it's just the small things. Like, you would think like something as small as just having those circles or just having those conversations wouldn't be impactful, but kids, children, students just want to be heard. And when you
Right.
do finally listen to them, like you said, it's powerful. So I love how you bring that into your classroom because I think of like, I mean, we're on different sides of the spectrum. Me teaching fourth grade, you teaching ninth grade,
Yeah.
which is like I don't know how you do it. That's amazing.
And likewise, I don't know how you all educate young people because I admire you guys.
Yeah, every time I like go to a training or anything and I see the high school teachers and I just like I'm thinking like they're so like they are excited and happy. It's like the switch. Like we're
Mhm.
all drained and like tired like as an elementary teachers and then like we see the high school teachers and they're like so pumped up and like having fun. It's just such a weird experience. But yeah, like I just think about like ninth grade being like the scariest time of my life. And I remember ninth
Yeah.
graders, I just remember me being a ninth grader and like I would not want to teach me. But you talk about again, like I love how you bring that into your classroom and those little things like pushing of more of just being just a classroom and like being more of a family and a connection
Yeah.
amongst each other.
Yeah.
I want to know because this is something that like I kind of want to bring into my classroom. Like I love hearing new things from educators. What are some go-to strategies for making English class exciting and meaningful? You talk about like the library. What are some other things that you do?
Yeah. I'd say changing up. Oops, sorry. I was
Oh
getting
no, you're fine.
every single day we start with some sort of discussion question, and I know
Hmm.
that like bell ringers aren't everybody's thing, but I think it helps students to be able to engage. Sometimes it's related to the content or what we're talking about that day, other times it's not, but
Yeah.
it helps students that are less vocal in class to actually have a voice because they have an opinion on what color folder they put for English class. They
Hmm.
have an opinion on that and they'll share, and so it allows everybody to speak. We do that. I love to do like fun activities. Sometimes high school students, and you might do this more in fourth grade, but in high school we don't color and we don't like
Yeah.
add in like, do posters all that
Oh,
much
we
sometimes.
love to color.
So
Yeah,
I know, and we need to do more of that in high school
yeah.
because we're all like children at heart sometimes.
Hmm.
But my students love to do that. And so there'll be, times where maybe it's for like a cultural project or like a
Hmm.
little introduction of something. Or maybe it's like one time I was introducing dialogue and how to write in dialogue with creative writing. And
Hmm.
so all took a comic strip and for 15 minutes in class, like colored and wrote in dialogue. And that was a really engaging moment that we were able to have some fun, but then
Yeah.
it's still related to class and it's not, unhinged activity. And then I think one thing one of my assistant principals was encouraging me to do, and this obviously happens more, I look forward to doing it more when I'm a more like learned teacher, more years in the field, but just to have fun with the class. And so,
Yeah.
for example, instead of I had these different components that I wanted students to highlight in their essay, like an introduction, like all these components, right? And instead of just telling them what colors they should pick, I had them brainstorm the colors they wanted to pick. And then in
Yeah.
kind of like a spelling bee style, they had to spell them out and we all voted on which one. It was silly. But again,
Yeah.
those type of techniques to get them engaged in even the small things pulls everybody in. And then all of a sudden they're all highlighting it.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that sounds like I want to be in your class. I
Oh,
remember like in the high school, like having English class and being like so bored. Like
yeah.
like being so bored. And I just think back and I'm like, what made it that way? And it was just like, again, you're bringing into these things into your classroom and you're speaking of like that in the future, still kind of like building upon that.
Yeah.
Like that would have been something amazing. And so I love how you bring that into your classroom. And then also like, this is something that teachers will take away. Like I love having, other teachers tell me like, hey, this is what I do in my classroom, just to try it out. There's no harm in trying. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just love that.
Yeah. And one thing I try to keep in mind, because what you were saying about being bored, like I felt
Yeah.
that way sometimes in high school, and like we're both young, like we weren't in
Yeah.
high school too long ago.
No, no.
So like I try to maintain this like posture because they're respecting me by being quiet.
Yeah.
And I hate that like, in public education, sometimes like to respect is to be quiet and just everybody needs
Yes.
to be quiet.
Yes.
But I also tell them that like, I'll speak for about 5 minutes and in my head I'm like running an internal clock where five
Yeah.
minutes I need to get them into some, conversation with a partner or in
Yeah.
some small group or some like verbally like they can express themselves because otherwise it becomes like, teachers just yap forever and
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
That's so interesting. No, yeah. It that's something crazy that I think about too, like that whole experience of a quiet classroom.
Mhm.
My kids like I love to talk, like and I don't mind them talking either. But I know a lot of teachers who are like it has to be quiet. So that's just something that I think I love that you brought up. But the next segment, let's talk books. And I know this is your cup of tea. What literature do you love incorporating in your curriculum to reflect diverse voices and experiences? Like what's your number one, like your top?
Ooh,
I
if
know
I could
that's
choose
hard.
anything.
Yeah.
Recently I read The Other Wes Moore, and that was amazing. If you've
Okay. I've never
um
read it.
Yeah, it was written by Wes Moore. I think he's the governor of Maryland right now.
Ooh.
But it talks about two black boys that were both named Wes Moore. And
Hmm.
if you haven't, give it a read. But like,
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
let's see. Right now, I think one that I'm very excited about is in 10th grade. They gave me a section of 10, so that's why it's throwing you off a little bit. But I teach mostly 9,
Yeah.
one section of 10. We read Fences by August Wilson, and it's a
Mm.
by August Wilson, set in the 1930s. And
Okay.
it was just a really it's a unique introduction to like playwriting for students
Hmm.
because most of the time we're reading novels.
Yeah.
But also it centers a black family that is kind of made up of different layers. The
Hmm.
father, Troy Maxon, he has a son from a different relationship and then a very faithful wife.
Yeah.
And we kind of get to see their life play out, but in light of the heavy like racism and prejudice that they were
Yeah.
facing during that time. I think too, it reminds me of like narrative that not a lot happens in terms of social progress and not a
Hmm.
lot happens in terms of like exciting, like celebratory events. But we're able to see a moment in time and kids are able to explore like what like issues related to that book. So
Yeah.
like, relationships and the theme of well, actually just like prejudice and how that
Yeah.
affects the family and socioeconomic class and all those and be able to apply the different lens. So kind of lost the question a little bit, but
No, you're fine.
that I play that I really have enjoyed studying. And I think
Yeah.
that when I enjoy studying a text, then students are pulled along into that and
Hmm.
like able to enjoy it more too.
Okay, I actually was writing those down as you speak that way because I need to get into those. So that is my next reading, my next bit of homework. So thank you for bringing that to the podcast because that is something that I definitely am interested in.
Thank you.
So thank you. But we're looking into segment 4 now, and this part I think that both of us can relate to, especially, and it's the young teacher experience.
Mhm.
Um, I'm very curious on your perspective and how you've approached being a young teacher on your campus. You're close to age in your students, with your students. How has that influenced your classroom dynamic?
Yeah. When I was student teaching, I was student teaching 12th graders, and
Mhm.
they were like 18, 19 years old, and I was 21. So it was very close in age. Now I
Yeah.
have about a 10 age gap, but
Okay.
your age gap with the students, which is nice.
Hmm.
But there's days when I show up to school and nobody can tell who's the teacher, and that's
Yeah.
just common. But I think that that allows for, as much as sometimes it does question credibility when you first
Hmm.
walk in the class, people are like, who's the teacher? It allows for a lot of connecting, like, with the
Yeah.
students. They see that I'm not like an older teacher who's been in education for a long time,
Yeah.
and they get excited that, like, I use sarcasm a lot in my
Yeah.
class, and so sometimes that's like classroom management, but then we also use other techniques too,
Hmm.
and they have a lot of fun with that. We have a lot of fun, but I think, yeah, being able to connect with them, um, I think like any attention is good attention. So sometimes that,
Yeah.
like, it does keep them more engaged in class when I'm getting super excited up front, and like I look young like they do. And so
Yeah.
they're staying engaged that way. Or they'll ask me questions. Sometimes it's about their lives, sometimes it's about like school in general. Like we
Hmm.
talk about, you're not I just caught you with your phone, you're
Yeah.
not even sneaking it well, that type of thing. And we talk about my experience with that, but then obviously I'm the teacher, I have them put it away. I think it
Yeah.
matters how think of yourself. So I think of
Hmm.
myself as an academic, like obviously I went to school, boils down to I have a college education and they don't. So I'm the
Yeah.
teacher in the classroom, but also I'm able to connect with them.
Definitely. I love how you bring up that aspect of like being a teacher and like walking in and again like them not knowing who the teacher is. And I know that's brought its own set of challenges, especially with like just veteran teachers. And I know from my own experience, I came into my campus. I'm a second year teacher now, so it's like again, I'm like kind of building and like I guess more of a sense of like trust for them and like okay, are they up to the job? Like can they handle it?
Mhm.
But I will note like I've noticed that they have a lot to teach me. Yes, like veteran teachers have a lot that they can give to newer teachers. But
Yeah.
I can also counter and say, like, as a newer teacher, I have also given
Yeah.
and provided so much for our veteran teachers as well. And when it turn in terms of like technology, connection pieces, academic, like things that, both sides can kind of bring to the table and
Yeah.
integrate and push for like a better impact or a bigger impact on their campuses.
Yeah.
Have you like experienced that, like bringing new things to your campus or even to your team?
Yeah. I've been told I bring a lot of energy to my team,
Yeah.
and I'm just, like, enthusiastic about what I do, so,
Yeah.
yeah, I will bring that, I hope, for a long time, even if I'm old. But you're so right, like, the technological stuff that we're learning, like, I
Hmm.
came in college, we had this whole class on, like, e-learning, and so
Yes.
bringing in new techniques to some of the, like, or
Hmm.
revamping a PowerPoint, to be honest, is,
Yeah.
a great thing, the addition that young teachers bring to their department.
Hmm.
I think new thoughts, and then like obviously the discussion of like what do we have currently and how can we make this a little bit more modern or make this more
Yeah.
relatable to what we're seeing in society today. I think that's all things that we bring, and I feel like nobody should question, as a young teacher, nobody should question like, should I really be here or do I add anything, because we do.
Yeah.
It's just different things for sure. And I love how you
Yeah.
said that you learn from the older teachers, because I definitely have benefited from them too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like it's a collaborative experience. Like
Yep.
we're learning together, we're building together, and it's not just for us; it's for our whole learning community. But you talk about like enthusiasm, and I know you're such like a energy driven person. Have you? I'm over here reading the wrong question, guys.
You're good.
Um,
It's true
you,
though.
you you use your enthusiasm as leverage to motivate students. Can you share how that plays into your teaching style?
Yep. It's a lot of going over to, I have my students in pod,
Hmm.
and I go over there if it's a lethargic group that are not talking, and maybe it's like slightly jesting and like making fun of their lethargy or whatever at the table, or
Yeah.
maybe it's just simply bringing my presence over and showing them and like talking about the discussion question that I wanted them to talk about individually
Hmm.
or like together, and then making it exciting. Like my face lights up, and all of a sudden, their nap looks a lot less interesting, and they're like,
Hmm.
maybe there's something to talk about here. But I think a lot of times it's also looking at the students, giving them eye contact, and like
Yes.
actually sitting there and waiting for them to share their entire thing. I think so many times growing up too, like I saw teachers ask a question and then like half hear out a student where,
Yeah.
yeah, we have to get back to class, we have to get things going, but going over and having those one-on-one chats with them, like that's what actually brings their personality out, and then in the
Hmm.
future they're more likely to share. So I do
Yeah.
like that.
I love that. Like hearing your students out, like, yeah, that's something that I never thought about. Is like
Mm,
actually hearing their full thought. Like
right.
they're even if it is long and has nothing to do. Well, that happens with fourth grade a lot. Is like
Oh, I bet.
yeah,
Oh,
you ask them a question and it's like, why I had this for ice cream. Like this, there's just so many things that they'll talk about. But
yeah.
even then, like that shows interest in like me hearing about what you have to say. So
Mhm.
I love that. We talk about your students, you bring enthusiasm into your classroom and like teach ninth graders. And that I know is just a crazy experience. And that transitions so well into segment 5, which is Gen Z and the future of education.
Mhm.
You said the world is sleeping on Gen Z. What do you
Yeah.
mean by that?
Yeah, I just think they have a lot to offer, and
Yeah.
we, might box them in by saying, they're all addicted to their phones, or,
Hmm.
ninth graders are all hyperactive and,
Yeah.
they can't stay focused. They're
Hmm.
all whatever. We have a lot of like thoughts when it comes to us, which are some of them are valid. But I also think that like this group of young adults,
Yeah.
14, 15-year olds that I teach, like they're some of the most like adaptive and like accepting, and like
Hmm.
they're vulnerable and they're able to talk about like difficult things like mental health or
Oh,
social
yes.
issues that like honestly I didn't see when I was in high school, and so I'm
Yeah.
very grateful for them. I had them do this one activity. It was our bell ringer one day, and it was what you wish your parents or like older adults knew about you. And there was a lot of comments that were like, we are not addicted to our phones, or just we do need moments to ourselves, but that doesn't mean we're
Hmm.
like antisocial and all these things. And so
Yeah.
I'm excited, honestly, for their futures, because I think as they learn how to express themselves well, it will
Hmm.
be like they're going to add a lot, and they have a lot of talents. Like I see artists in my class, I see people who are like going to be future like coders or um,
Hmm.
tech developers and all that, and
Yeah.
writers in my class. And I'm excited for that. I think I can see it better maybe because I'm closer to their age, and I'm
Hmm.
like, I don't have those skills. So you're going to add
Yeah.
something that, yeah, we need. But yeah.
Yeah, they're very aware. Like, yeah,
Yes.
very aware of a lot of what's going on in the world. And I remember as being a high school student, like I didn't even know like half of what they know
Yeah.
because it's like they're so aware. They have access to a lot, which can be a good and a bad thing, but also
Right.
still that they're able to articulate like how they feel, like what's going on in the world and how that makes them feel. And even like for my fourth graders, like they know a lot of stuff that I would never like think to know as a fourth grader or even expect them to know. Even like, things politically, like they'll bring up things like that and I'm like, whoa, like how do you even like know about that? They're like,
Wow.
well, TikTok or like, just things like that. I'm like, whoa, that's amazing. But I want to talk about how you help students recognize their potential in a system that often underestimates them. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think that comes through personal feedback. Um,
Hmm.
in I prioritize certain things in my class because as teachers we have to have boundaries too with how much
Yes.
we do and how much we exert of ourselves. So I try to keep my school day to just the paid work day, which is great.
Hmm.
It has been really nice for me, like emotionally in all the areas. But there's one thing that like they write personal narratives, which
Yeah.
talk about a coming of age moment in their life. That's an example of something that I'll take my personal time and write feedback to each of them, or to be able to like connect with them after, to say that this is a really great perspective because they're sharing like very vulnerable parts of their life.
Hmm.
So I'd say it's choosing select moments. Sometimes it's like talking to students in groups. Other times it's like writing feedback on a worksheet that they've done, but choosing which worksheets and which prompts are ones that like might delve into their personal life a little bit
Yeah.
so that I can comment and encourage them like that.
Yes, oh my gosh, like, this next question, I think really your answer is gonna probably support, like, that work that you already do,
Okay.
because sometimes, like, our education system kinda it really does underestimate a lot of our students, especially depending on, where they may live or,
Yeah.
what school they come from. If you could change one thing about the education system to better support both teachers and students, what would it be?
Oh, that's good. I think for teachers, I would give them a little bit more time to like
Yes.
develop themselves, to be able to work on all the work that they need to be doing. And yeah, we're
Mhm.
always asking for more time, and that's sometimes not able to be given.
Yeah.
But I think that like there's teachers doing good work, and it
Mhm.
just needs, some recognition and some time given to be able for them to continue that without like draining themselves. So that would be on
Yes.
the teacher side. On the student side, I think it would be letting kind of breaking some of the stereotypes with,
Mhm.
student behaviors associated to certain like the future
Yes.
of certain, like where students are going.
Oh,
Because
yes.
I know like sometimes, and I have to remind myself this every day, that like the
Mhm.
way students come into my class on a certain day or even on a certain month or
Yeah.
year, whatever,
Like
it's not necessarily how they're going to be next year. And it doesn't
mhm.
about who they are as people, their value as people. And I sometimes in my students who are not turning in work, or I'm really getting on them about like participating in class, when I
Yeah.
connect with them individually, I notice they're very intelligent individuals that have just chosen to focus their energies on other things,
Another
at
yes.
school. So I wish changing that perspective that like students are going to be stuck in this route and they're like, oh no, this is horrible trajectory
Mhm.
for them. I really don't think it's the case. But it depends on which teacher can reach them and at what point.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah.
So, it's just something to funny to think about. Like, I grew up a kid, like, that was, like, not the chattiest kid. Like, I was so shy and, like, really reserved, like, to myself. And I remember, like, teachers being like, "Oh, he's so quiet," and, like, I would tell, like, people all the time, like, growing up, I wanted to work in the arts or, like, some kind of creativity, and
Love
even
that.
as a teacher right now, like, I'll see some of my teachers from back then, like, because I work in the same district, so I'll see them and I'll be like, "Hi, Miss blah, blah, blah," or, "Hi, Mister" yeah, like,
Yeah.
I'll see them and they're like, "Wait, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a teacher," and they're like, "Really? You're a teacher?" And they're not meaning it in, like, a way, but they're like, "You're a
Yeah.
teacher?" Like, and so, like, I that connects to the piece that you were saying of, like, having this, like, this judgment about our students, like, this preconceived notion about, like, behavior-wise, how they're
Mhm.
acting now, that being a kind of like a catalyst for who they'll be
Mhm.
in the future, and so I
Yeah.
just think about that even for myself, like, I was a really shy kid, but here I am on a podcast and, like,
Yeah.
teaching, and so those are just, like, different things that I always think about, so, like, for you, like, was that something that you had to think, like, teachers had a preconceived notion about you as a student? Like,
Mhm.
about who you'll be or, like, what you'll do?
I don't think they would have guessed that I would become an English teacher. But there were several teachers that invested in me and saw
Mhm.
potential in me, and that was how I took a leap of
Yeah.
something. Like one of my teachers, it was an English teacher. She was like, I had never before written poetry, and I think I was just average in her class, but
Yeah.
she for some reason wanted to invest some time in me and say,
Mhm.
"Hey, Megan, I'm going to help you write poetry, and I want you to, write these poems for some of our school events." And so she invested in me, and I still think about her to this day. A couple years back, I sent her like thank you email because it made such a difference to have somebody like look at like what I
Yeah.
thought
Be
was very
invested,
average work
yeah.
and be invested, and that changed my perspective towards poetry and words like that. But yeah, I also my sister was rather quiet, and
Mhm.
that was always at parent teacher conferences.
Yeah.
Quiet was always associated with just not participating, not a great student,
Mhm.
and I think that was harmful. Or like I realized as an older sister who saw how intelligent like my younger
Yes.
sister was, just because you're not talking doesn't mean you aren't smart. And so
Yeah.
but it is hard because on the teacher side now, like sometimes we
Mhm.
do want to hear from all the students, and if you're not talking,
Yes.
we can't hear your perspective. So
Yeah, and they may have those thoughts, they may know, but it's just harder, it's harder, and I like, as a kid living through that, like, I would just be so fearful of, like, answering because it just I mean, many emotions, right? And so just that's that kinda thing I think about, but thank you for sharing that story about your sister and even just
I
you
love that
growing up.
to be honest, that you get to go back
Thanks.
and like share with them where you're at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I will say
really
one
great.
last thing with,
Yeah.
those students, sometimes maybe they're not very vocal, but maybe
Yeah.
what they write or what they draw even is really well done and really well thought out, and so
Hmm.
sometimes I like to post their work, and so
Oh,
it's a
yes.
form of, like, recognizing them without calling on them, you know?
Hmm. That
Yeah.
is amazing. Yes, I love showing work and like even especially for those students.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that here. But we're going to go ahead and shift into our closing segment, and that is final thoughts and where to follow Megan. Megan, this has been such an insightful conversation. Truthfully, before we wrap up, what advice would you give to other young educators navigating the profession?
We talked about this a little bit,
Hmm.
but I would say continue to be assertive and enthusiastic, because I think that even if it's not immediately seen as a benefit to other educators, it really is. Like, I guess I'm talking to them, but like you're
Yeah.
bringing a lot to the table. Um,
Yes.
and there's a lot of educators too that are very tired with the profession. I think enthusiasm's always good. Like,
Hmm.
don't let other people's tiredness bring your, excitement for the profession down. And then I also
Yes.
say, like, with that, choose the people that surround you very,
Hmm.
because we get to choose who we spend time with on our lunch break,
Yes.
whatever. And so be selective. Obviously, you can't be in certain situations, but that's
Uh-huh.
important too. And then, like, also to I would say, keep a documentation of your progress and your personal growth, because
Yes.
like what you're doing now, Brandon, I feel like
Oh,
you're able to point back to moments
yeah.
earlier in your career that if
Hmm.
you hadn't documented that or like kept track of that, it'd just be kind of like, nobody
Yes.
would know. And so I think that's really cool for young teachers to know that, like, I can keep a student sample, or I can keep,
Hmm.
like, how I was feeling this day and then the progress, um,
Yeah.
so that later on you can refer back to it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So thank you so much for that. Like those are three things, especially as new teachers, we deal with a lot of like that reflection piece,
Mm.
especially, which I really love. I want to ask you, especially centering around the idea of like representation and inclusion, how do you think teachers or how can teachers continue to create inclusive, engaging, and student centered learning environments? Because you do it so well.
Oh, thank you. Big on listening for sure.
Hmm.
Anytime that I'm not teaching, to be listening to their stories and seeing where, like, we can highlight people within our class, because not only does that, like, allow everybody else to learn, it also gives those individuals confidence, and they, like, need that within today's world. I would also say, like, having constant conversation with others, colleagues, of
Yeah.
like, what are we doing to make sure that our what we're teaching in the classroom reflects what they need to be knowing in the 21st century in America today. So I guess those two things, and then being open to changes, because I
Yeah.
know for myself, if I'm given feedback from admin, from a colleague or my mentor, it's always something I can consider, even if I nothing changes. But yeah, it's good to be open.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that here.
Mhm.
And lastly, where can people find you and connect with you to learn more about your work and your insights?
Yeah, sure. I have my Instagram. I have like a teacher page, a tiny little teacher page where I'm just
Yeah.
using it to document my work. So kind of what I
Yes.
did before. And so that's at Miss Reed Teaches. I also am, like, I guess on LinkedIn, just have a page there with my resume and stuff like that. So that's Megan Reed. But yeah, uh, also email works too. So
Yes.
yeah, the traditional.
Amazing, amazing. And here on the pod, we love to end our conversations with congratulating you, giving you your flowers, and really being here for you as a support. This is a community of educators who are supporting you actively. From here on out, we want to just, is there anything coming up, big or small? We just love to share and highlight the things that you're doing, maybe in your classroom, in your community, in your own personal life. Anything coming up?
For me personally,
Yes.
I don't have a lot coming up, I'm not gonna lie, but I would say in the future, I am thinking about getting a master's degree, and so moving
Yes.
towards, looking into that currently.
Yes, that'll be amazing. Like, thank you for sharing that. And again, this is a community of learners and educators who are here to support you. So, I love that you're here doing the work, being a part of a movement of educators, really reshaping the future. But we are going to go ahead and close out our episode. Thank you so much, Megan, for making this an amazing kickstart and kickoff of season 2 of Teaching in Color podcast. I couldn't think of anyone better to come and share their story and share their work here on the podcast. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Follow us on Teaching in Color Podcast on all social media. And until next time, keep teaching in color. Thank you so much for listening, guys. And thank you again, Megan.
Thanks, Brandon.
Of course. Bye, guys.